Well, welcome. I enjoy doing these. I've done them a time or two before, and the locations changed as well as the format. Because I think the last one might have been, well, it might have been here, but then it was over at the church across the street.
That's right.
So I told Katie, and she asked me what, and I decided I wanted to do it on Isam Dart, the black cowboy. So he's been one of my research projects for a long time, and I want to do a little bit of fun. And I'm going to do some things because of the prejudice of the time. I'm a huge fan of the current ability to people do what I call revisionist history. I think people lose a tremendous amount by not taking the time and the place that it was dealt with. And what I'll do, and some people would be considered offensive, and totally is offensive in the day that we live in. But where I'm headed with Isam Dart is because there are a number of people in this story that I wouldn't have cared to meet. One of them, I won't tell you your name. When we get there, I don't want to surprise where I'm headed. I would have not liked to have met this individual at all. I would have been excited to have actually met Isam Dart, to have had the privilege to actually do that. So, and I'm not going to go into huge stories. There'll be some times and we're going to do a little bit, but that's a photograph that is the main one that's known for Isam Dart. And it was an amazing deal. The museum actually owns the original tintype that's taken off of. It took a long time to find that. And it's like, give me a good thing that I can chase and look, and I'm happy, if we can do that. And so it's taken a long time because it was because of a really good reporter with the Denver Post in the 1960s. You could follow that trail, and through some people that kept it. So we are going to talk about prejudice, and we're going to. So there's a couple of I want to take you on a walking tour. We aren't going to walk, but in your minds, I want you to walk through some time with me here. And so I want to set the stage before I do it. The first is I'm only going to talk about Routt County, and now realizing Browns Park is now in Moffat County and a little bit in Daggett County, Utah. So it's not the case, but until 1911, it was all Routt County. So this is all said in Routt County. So I'm going to say that all the time. Don't think that I'm geographically challenged that bad. But all the things that happen as far as law enforcement, as far as juries, as far as things, happen at Hans Peak, because that was the county seat. So everything's going to be tied to Hans Peak and the term Routt County. The other thing I want to put out is everything is about cattle. Okay, cattle is king. Okay, that was we could have a few other things. You can mention gold, you can mention other, but the main thing in Routt County in 1900 and before was all about cattle. The 10 top taxpayers were all cattle ranchers, or a Haley being at the top, but he would have done that. And so the other thing is that cattle is all about grazing and all about forage. And doing that, Northwest Colorado is an amazingly unique place, and it has things that no other place has when it comes to grazing. So you get this really, you've got to have a place to winter your cattle, and then you've got to have a place to summer them for. It's all about grazing, and it's all about water, and it's all about range. So if I forget to bring up the range thing again, believe me, what happens in this end of the story part for Isam is tied as much to cattle rustling or that thing, and it's tied to range. Probably, I think, more than it is the other. So what I want to sort of do is to walk, if you can imagine, if you've been at an old ranch or an old ranch house, if you've got a gate, okay, and those gates are cedar posts, and there's a thing over the top, there's a bar over the top, and lots of times they're the rough wood, and the hinges squeak as you go through, and the latch is usually steel, and it hits, you can hear it. So I want you sort of to imagine that we're going to walk through a gate like that, wherever you guys want to take that, and we're going to walk back in time that way. Because the fact is, I'm trying to isolate Isam's story into its time and its place, and not try to pull it back. And then when that part's done, we're going to come back through. So we don't have very long to do that, but I think that concept and those sounds are sort of a fun thing to play on as we do. Isam Dart was born in Texas, a couple of different dates potentially, but in He shows up in the 1870 census, and his parents were Cyrus and his mother was Indiana. The mother was born in South Carolina, Mississippi. The dad, Cyrus, was born in South Carolina. He shows, as well as a number of siblings, that he was born in Texas. So they're with a group of about 3 other black families, but everybody on either side of that census page is white. They were farming at a particular part, so there was a small group of that. You can see that there, of course, that's the first census when blacks actually had a name, except when they weren't property. And so you finally get to see that, and there's certain ways to work back, but it's difficult. That family would stay in Texas. So he's from, and I'm probably going to mess this up, Seguin, Guadalupe County, Texas. So it's just east of Fort Worth. And that's where he shows up. Everything's going to trace him back to being from the area around San Antonio. Everything goes back and it says he's from Texas. It's extremely important to the actual talk and understanding his life as well. So his siblings are there. By 1880, the family stays there. If anybody ever wanted to do the genealogical work, there'd really be no debate that you could find people that are descended from Isam Dart's brothers and sisters. That's pretty easy to do. Nobody's ever done it. I've never seen anybody go that far, but we were able to come up with grandkids and different people that were from that same family in Texas. So he had a name, he had a family, and a number again. So he somewhere during that huge push out of Texas after the Civil War would take that cattle drive. There's a couple of different riders that, again, initially he didn't even have a horse. He was running around learning how to rope cattle and stuff, just running. He's said to be a tall guy, amazingly enough, and extremely rugged. Again, the picture is, I think you're going to see something today. I still give me goosebumps with one of the pictures that you get to see later on. So the first thing we really have of Isam is in the sandhills of western Nebraska. He shows up in that particular area. And then he comes through different things. He ends up working for Middlesex, which is a huge cattle company that was from Rock Springs, Green River, up into that basin, and would come down into Browns Park. There was a lot of pressure on the range in Browns Park from Middlesex. It was a lot of those companies in the 1880s. Again, those would be out of English ownership. And the thing that really, really messed them up was the winter of '87, which killed tremendous amount of the cattle in the whole range area. It came late and it froze hard and they couldn't dig down through that to get down to that grass. So they lost huge amounts of cattle. And a lot of those English companies became bankrupt because of that particular part. And the money didn't come anymore, and and then comes the fact that Browns Park is close. It's a great wintering range. It still is. It's cold. Green River, with Flaming Gorge, it's less likely to do it today, but it would freeze in the winter, but there'd be very little snow on it. Probably had better forage actually at the time, so it became a haven for mountain man in this period of time, and then later on any of the cattle that they were trying to get through the winters, which were terrible up into Wyoming with the blizzards and things it would affect. So Isam pulls down and he ends up in Browns Park, and he ends up with a guy that's going to come along with him, Matt Rash, who is actually a family member of the same family of what Davy Crockett was related to. He's buried in Hood County, Texas, in a small cemetery where the family came from. I've talked to some of the family again. That family I know of, they've kept up with him, and I might bring that back up later. So by '85, or maybe earlier, Isam's in Browns Park, and by '80, so he's known as a bronco buster and a roper. We were talking, the term cowboy is fairly rare in those periods. In fact, a lot of people weren't really like to be called a cowboy. They wanted to be called a bronco buster, or a cattle. They wanted to do that. So he would come into a part with this very, very, very unique family in Browns Park, sort of the first official, best-known family of Moffat County. See, I used the wrong name. I should say Route. Sorry, I just stepped out of that trail. And anyway, the Bassett family. So Herb and Elizabeth they would come out of Arkansas. Herb was from New York State, but they would come up and show up in the late 70s in Browns Park and come back, and by the early 80s they were in the same place that's still known as the Bassett Place in Browns Park today. They would be there. So needless to say, Sam was much more the scholarly person, much more the person that took care of books. He would become the postmaster. He would do all of those type things. Elizabeth was basically the owner of the ranch and would keep the hands in. So two of her ranch hands would become Matt Rash and Isam Dart. That would be pivotal. And a couple of the story that's coming up, there were a bunch of other people. This group of cowboys, I'm going to use that term, were very fluid oftentimes. They'd come and go with the seasons and the work and whatever would be called for them to do. So there were other people as far as that particular area, and he would make that area pretty much his home from that point on. And again, we're just going to be talking about him. So by 89, for one of the examples that you have of him, he was actually arrested for cattle rustling, or neat cattle was the official term. And the deputy sheriff for Sweetwater County, his name was Philbrick, he actually arrested him and took him up to Green River for a court case. In doing that, they actually had their buggy turn over, and the deputy was badly injured in that particular case. So Isam would actually step in, bandage him up, get him taken in, and so he was actually not convicted of that particular thing of stealing cattle. He didn't do that. He would come back and he would actually file a case against the deputy for taking him out of Routt County without a valid summons, and saying, you can't take me from Routt County, Colorado and take me into Wyoming. That was thrown out of court apparently, but the fact is a black man was able to take somebody to trial. Not to trial, and well it did, it was probably thrown out, but to file a court case against him. He was even at one particular point in this time sort of a justice of the peace that he did, in far, far north part, up above where the Sparks are in Browns Park, just below the wine. He actually ran for that office and was elected of a very, very small district. So I just want to sort of tell you that he was a normal. So then you get back into Browns Park with a very heavy battle going on between the Hoy brothers. Now if you have Craig connections at all, and sometimes Routt County connections, the name Hoy is spelled H-A-U-G-H-E-Y. Not in Browns Park, it's H-O-Y. And so the Hoy brothers, and they would basically come in, and through lots of different ways, they would end up owning most of all the bottom lands in Browns Park through there. And because of that, they actually came into somewhat with Elizabeth Bassett's personality and her cowboys. They did this. You know, and they would file, and that Hoys, if they were no better at filing suits against their neighbors, they also did it against each other. They were equal opportunity. They would do it either way. And they oftentimes were suing each other back and forth. In 88, 89, V.S. Hoy, which she'll meet later in the story, he actually basically puts all the neighbors in Browns Park and puts a summons against them for being involved in stealing his cattle. So they end up all at Hans Peak for a particular trial, realizing Hans Peak had no jail. There really is not a jail in this period. And the women were put in the hotel, and the men were in another one. That will also tie back to the problem they had keeping track of their prisoners, because they only had one deputy guarding them. And guess what? They didn't have indoor toilets. So there was no way one deputy. So that's going to work really well into the story that's coming up. So anyway, here are some guys. The two guys that were actually tried for it was a guy by the name of Angus McDougall and Jack Fitch. They were involved in burning down the haystacks for the Hoys. They burned down that, and they were, again, stealing cattle. And so he got them on both of those particular. The other one that was arrested for that was Isam Dart. And so it gets to be a sort of a fun little thing. But anyway, again, everything took 6 months or a year to happen in Routt County. Anybody have a clue how long it would take to go from horseback from Browns Park to Hans Peak?
No, 7 days.
A considerable period of time. which is one of the reasons they say Browns Park was lawless. No, they just took care of things because they knew that everything would have been resolved before the sheriff got there. You know, they fortunately or unfortunately took care of it themselves, sometimes better than other times to do that. So those guys were all done. They had to get witnesses. The sheriff was only one guy, and it would take him a long time to get that together. So in 1890, the trial took place at Hans Peak for these guys. And the part, I'll be honest, I'm not trying to say that Isam Dart never took a cattle, okay? If you read the stuff, he probably did, okay? He probably was guilty of that. So the Sunday before, it'd be really interesting to know how he did it. The Sunday before the trial was to start, he disappears. He's at Hans Peak. Some people say the people from Browns Park brought him a horse and he took off and rode off. But certainly it's well documented that he just walked off from the deputy. And I think it could have been on his way to the outhouse, let's be honest. But you know, he didn't have anyone so the two guys that did a lot of time, they got 5 years, were Angus McDougall and John, the two white guys. Were actually the ones that ended up going to Canyon City. John Fitch will disappear to history. I don't know where he went. Angus actually comes back to Browns Park, and he's involved in some other things later on that he does that. So again, but I want you to read something. I will tell you that if they did trials today like they used to do, I don't think anybody would go to jail under this with circumstantial. So this is just a little reading out of the Aspen Daily Chronicle. Ran this in September 30th of 1890, which, by the way, the head DA person was from Aspen that covered the whole district of this corner, and so he was definitely tied into Aspen. So V.S. Hoy, which is Valentine S. Hoy, and his wife, also testified to the tracks. This is about seeing things going on. And their testimony was mentioned by Frank Woolsey of John Fitch talking in his sleep, and of his stating in his sleep that he was one of the party to burn the buildings, and of Fitch's admission of the other matters stated in his sleep afterwards also being true. This is a substance with most correctly testimony on the subject, and the jury found the defendant, Angus McDougall and John Finch, guilty, and the court sentenced them to penitentiary for a period of 5 years each. And I will tell you, thank goodness they don't actually put into testimony what we would say in our sleep. I don't know about you, but we could be in trouble, you know. And I find it hard to believe that was actually put into testimony. It's like, wow, okay, that's scary. So I'm not sure they had the best evidence on these guys, you know. So meanwhile, while that happened, and his compatriots end up at least 3 years in Canyon City, he disappears. There's lots of different stories, but meanwhile, this photograph is taken. And so it's taken by a photographer over in Denver by the name of John Green, who was an African-American photographer. So it's not hard to figure out. It's taken in about 1892. Green was a pretty prolific photographer in Denver and stayed in business for like 30 to 40 years that he'd do this. This is his familiar backdrop. These are stage props that he had for those guns, because they certainly don't fit the time, nor the place necessarily. But anyway, he would send this original tintype. So everything is reversed. If you have to do the right as left, etc., because of the tintype. He would send it to the Allen family at the time in Rockville, Illinois. They had been in Browns Park. If you're familiar with Browns Park, across from the Lador School site is Allen Bottom. That's named after the John Allen that this family was sent to. He was Justice of the Peace at the time, heavily involved in that. Early on, then by 1890, he leaves and goes back to where he's from in Illinois. So this photo was actually sent to that family because he was friends with them. It's again sort of doing the part of doing that. We'll get back to that particular part as well. Some people say he never. So before the time that his McDougal and Fitch are out of prison, he's back in Browns Park. Nothing else was ever said, except gradually he was convicted. And in the time, if you mentioned Isam Dart or almost any other black person, you had to put the name colored behind it. And I would say that that was because they just had to demean the fact that they could have been or should have been, depending on your premise, and property compared to being sanctioned. And it's too bad, and it is the time, and he almost always does that. But the stuff I'll read, and they make this terrible term, in my opinion. They make this term that he was the whitest black man I ever met. That's made of him. And it's like, really? But anyway, the colored parts of it goes on. So in 1898, one of the key things that happens is Lanton Tracy joined up with Johnston and Bennett. That's the biggest thing that affected Route County as far as law enforcement ever, because the sheriff and the deputy sheriff were headed into Browns Park to basically try to find and arrest somebody for stealing Hoy's cattle again. Always Hoy's. That's going to also tie in. Hoy's cattle, and selling them to the crew that was actually working at the smelter ranch. So the smelters for the copper kilns, they were selling Hoy's cattle at that spot. So he had sworn out a warrant for these two guys. In the meantime, somebody's killed at the Hoy Ranch up in Wyoming and comes down. In the meantime, Lanton Tracy, who are escapees from the Utah State Pen, which, by the way, if you want to hear more about Harry Tracy, you can go onto YouTube. Paul Knowles, the assistant director at the museum, has a great thing on Harry Tracy. He becomes America's Most Wanted. It's a crazy story about Harry Tracy. And so you can go onto YouTube and look that up and see that. So those guys show up at the same exact time as the other people, and they all converge in the middle of Browns Park. And so they headquarter at the Bassett Place, which is the central part. The western part of Browns Park's centerpiece would have been Krause's maybe, but later on the Jarvie Place, which is still down there, which the BLM runs, is the Jarvie Ranch. The eastern side, it was the Bassett Place, is where they'll tie that into. So they show up, and as they keep running and doing, so they end up one night, and this is cold February. They go down after they're caught, and Bennett is actually fires. He went to get supplies for everybody. He fires his pistol. They hear it. He's taken back to the Bassett Place. The other guys they continue to look for, and meanwhile they come upon him and they have to run off and leave everything. So one night they actually go clear down Lador Canyon until they get to the end of the ice, and then they have to run back and try to get up in the canyons. So that particular day, because Valentine Hoy wasn't going to have anybody stop him, very forward and very good businessman, what you hear, he charged up through the rocks and he's killed by Harry Tracy as he goes through. So that's that story. And so they have to they leave his body as they try to get away for the night and warm up at the Bassett Place. Meanwhile, these other guys take and run off. So the person that was heavily involved in that posse, both to take care of the horses and get them back, and actually the next day when they saw that they had started their run towards basically Powder Wash. So basically these guys were going to try to head to Powder Wash to get away from the law, across really hard conditions, no horse, and by the way, their shoes had worn out, so they were doing this basically barefoot in this particular time. Really hard. So Isam Dart was also involved in that posse. Very much a part of the community, very much involved in everything, very trusted. That you don't see any of those particular pieces of doing that. And as he has that, the next part, and I think I'll do a little bit of a story jump on this before we get into the 1900 story. This is by a man by the name of Tom Davenport. Davenports are a huge name in historic Browns Park, and actually would have had their place on Willow Creek, so it'd be over into Utah. And this man would end up his life, and I find it interesting that two people sort of shine in this particular part, and they probably knew Isam Dart the best. So this is an interview that a man by the name of, get his name right, Joseph Davenport did. He was a policeman in Rock Springs at the time. This is 1929. And they do a special. And he's always referred to as a Negro cowpuncher of early days, Isam Dart. And so this is what Joe Davenport tells. I worked side by side with him for years. He taught me all the tricks of riding. Isam was the most polite man I ever met, was a courtier supreme to his respects for women, said Davenport. I was just like a kid when he came to this country. He kept his place and invariably ate his meals in silence alone, although not a cowman, ever objected to his company. I've seen all the great riders, but for all-around skills as a cowman, Isam Dart was unexcelled, and I never saw his peer. He was fond of watching bucking contests, and often outride any of them, but he never entered the contest. And so it mentions a little bit, there's a photo of him that's really blurry. I didn't bring it because we don't have the best copy. But what's sort of interesting about that is he also was evidently in the Moab area, because some authors had said the photos taken in Browns Park. It's wrong rock formations. So it's in the Moab area that he was in. And so he did get around. And so he does talk about him going to Grand Junction, pardon that. And then he's the one that ties it back. Isam Dart, endeared to those who remember his excellent traits, found those conditions awaiting him when he came to my boyish gestures from San Antonio, Texas in the early 80s. So that again ties him back to that same area, Texas, that we were talking about. So in 1900, I would say there was this major shadow took over Browns Park. If you were really to look at it, it became very dark. And I would say that the problem that had happened, and it wasn't just the smaller cattle owners necessarily, but the major one, is they could not ever get these guys to a court of law with a jury of their peers that would find them guilty. And it frustrated those cattlemen, nothing crazy, because they could never get a jury to say they were guilty. And so their answer, Ora Haley being the big guy, which was from Laramie, he came into Routt County as soon as the Ute Indians left. I mean, I'm not sure Haley wasn't there the next day. There were other people that probably did too, because he recognized the point. So Haley would start out in the area of Craig first, probably back almost in the 1870s. And then he would work, and then his cow camp was at Lay. That ties in the Lay post office, was actually the first postmaster, was actually a guy by the name of Gregory, and he was Ora Haley's brother-in-law. And his wife was Ora Haley's sister. And so and that's the trail that would take you over to Meeker. And so that was their cattle. And then as he expanded his herd, he would also go, he bought out some ranchers on the Little Snake River. Is everybody familiar with the road, the major road that goes to Browns Park? Every sort of been there. So as you cross Little Snake River and you come up, the two bars, the place on the north still, that Raptopos is owned today, that would have been the place that Ora Haley would make his headquarters in the west. So as soon as he did that, remember what I told you? It's all about cattle, and it's all about range, and it's all about water. The other day I noticed that Snake River had, it appeared, except for pools, to be dry. Even with high savory running, it seemed to be dry, except for those pools. It didn't look like it was running. It's that dry. Anyway, he would set up his point there. So as soon as that happened in '98, they became the basic same problem as Middlesex had been for Browns Park on the north. And they kept wanting, because they considered the Browns Park range to be underutilized. And they had to do something to be able to help that. Because, you know, having grass go to waste, who can have that? I mean, if it could be my grass and you're not using it, there's something wrong. And let alone the fact that they couldn't convict these guys in court. So this man had come up with and met with Haley in Denver, I think. Could be it was Cheyenne. And they talked over the business transaction. We could go into a lot of detail about it. He is the one man I would have no desire to ever meet. I mean, I would walk across any street I could to get away from meeting Tom Horn. Because what he would become is he was not only, he was the investigator, he was the judge, the jury, the executioner, and the money man. I mean, and you know, the story was that every person he killed, he got $500, which was a decent amount of money in 1900. So he set about being the detective, and he would, and there were more people than Haley involved in it, but the tie-back money trail goes back sort of to Haley. He had the bucks. And so I would say that, so he worked with Matt Rice, that was the first guy, and there's lots of stories. This oral history, which if we have a chance to hear a little bit of it, you're actually going to hear a little bit. I'm not going to read this part until the end. If it works, if it doesn't work, I'll read this to you. His name was William Daniel Titsworth. He's going to be the son of the guy that wrote the book I most dislike. Okay. It's an interesting, that's the fun part about history. You never know what you're going to go. Anyway, he would come into Browns Park, and he tells of some personal stories. It was an extremely well done oral history, considering that, you know, he probably died within the few years after. So this guy has not been alive to help tell stories for 70 some years, but he saw such an amazing things when he was in the park. So he ends up getting really friendly with Matt Rice, and then you've got Ann Bassett. How many in the room have heard of Ann Bassett at least? So I'm going to plug the book somewhere here. Is Nighthawk Rising. Right in front of me. It is the biography of the Q's cattle rustler, Queen Ann Bassett of Browns Park. So Diane Corris did this 5-6 years ago. It's probably the best book for historical accuracy that was ever done on Browns Park. I would encourage you, as we get closer to the gate, to go back out. That you, if you're interested at all, because I've hit so many high points and haven't covered the others, that you would take a hold of her book and see the rest of the story, because she does a better job on that. So that happened in he came under the name of Tom Hicks. He would show up with rash. There's some talk about him really disliking a guy also by the name of Jim McKnight, who was supposed to be involved in stealing cattle. He also, Isam Dart fits into that thing. So the fact being, at that time, Jim McKnight was married to Josie Bassett, one of the girls. And the divorce was coming really close to happening at the time. And since he was divorcing Josie, and he basically was getting the homestead on Josie's uncle's place, Sam, on Beaver Creek, which is right on the Colorado-Utah border, he couldn't get anybody to vouch for him on his homestead. Nobody in Browns Park. He had to come clear to Craig to get people to say yes, he'd been there that long. That's how bad the people in Browns Park didn't like him. So he sort of ends up out of the park a lot, which is probably what saved his life, to be honest with you. And it's going to be Isam Dart's place. That's where he's staying up on Cold Springs, is that particular place. But first of all, there's Matt Rice, who was the head of the Browns Park Livestock Association. So if you're the guy that's in charge of all that property, all that land, who better to take out than the guy that's at the top? And Rice had also been arrested for several things and had never been able to be convicted. And so he would take that on. So this is in July. Again, they had perjured themselves to some extent, I guess, with Tom Horn, but he was looking for his payday. Don't ever forget that. Because he was going to end up with somebody, I hate to say this, he was going to end up with somebody dead, whether they did it or not. I think that's the kind of person he really was. Yeah. We can go into his personality defaults, and I think when you actually take up the fact that you're going to kill somebody, you've gone way, way too far. You know, I'm not going to give you a lot of credence. So by about July 4th, Matt Rice had come back from Browns Park. His place is up on Cold Springs, a little more to the east than where Isam Dart's going to be at, and a little bit farther to the north. Absolutely gorgeous place. I will tell you, if you ever want to go down there, it's on private land, and that you have to call the Dickinson Ranch and probably check with Raptopoulos so you don't trespass. But that is a gorgeous place. The spring there, I think it was Paul and I was there a couple of years ago, and a cow elk with her calf were running out through the aspen. There's aspen groves. There's a great, amazing rock cliff that's there, and the springs. It's an aspen, just a beautiful area. There's still about this much of his foundation left, and you can see. And so he was killed. They didn't find him for a few days, so they actually buried him really close to his cabin. And you can still, because soon thereafter, about the time that Isam Dart was killed, his father and brother would come up from Texas and exhume the body and take it back to be buried in Texas. But the hole is still there. So it's sort of weird when you walk up to it, because as the years have happened on Cold Springs, the ground has come up and the hole's widened.
Oh.
So it's much wider than it was, and it's much shallower than it was, and it's getting really hard to even see at this particular point. Isam Dart was a little farther and was in Jim McKnight's. So he was taking care because people were notifying that either leave the country or die. That was one of the things that Tom Horn told them. He gave him a chance to get out. Needless to say, it was not the place that they took him real serious. Matt Rice hadn't, and he was by himself. Isam Dart had people with him when he went out there. It was October of 1900, and as he walked out to his corral to saddle up the horses. So Ev Bassett was really with him. There was a couple of others that were back in the cabin, and so from a defensive spot, he was shot dead, and that will be part of that part. So that was one shot. Matt Rice was shot 3 different times before that, and it gets into a crazy story. But I take you back to the fact that none of us would want to run into the investigator, the judge, jury, and executioner that was getting money. Most of us aren't that perfect, really, that we could stand up under that particular kind of deal. So we're going to do this little piece, so I'm going to save this a little bit here for the story about his burial. And if it doesn't make it to where you can hear Titsworth telling the story, I'll read the parts that are sort of relevant. So we're going to leave, and we're going to, for the time being anyway, we're going to walk back through that gate that I told you about. It's been a little while, a little longer than maybe I should have made it, but we're going to go through this part maybe a little faster. So I'm going to have Katie bring up a photo. This is my favorite photo of Isam Dart. So it comes off of the tintype, which, by the way, Mr. Green that day was a little bit blurry. His focus wasn't perfect if you look at the tintype. So this is courtesy AI. But I will tell you, it nails every single part of that face. And it's there is a story because of what happens coming up that they called him Crop-Ear. I find it very interesting that the son knew Isam Dart. They asked him, was he missing an ear? He says, I never thought of that, which tells to me that he wasn't, that was a story made up about him later. But I am, that one gets me, because I think you see a real person there, and you get some opinion of the intensity of his personality. Yeah.
On the previous picture, was he barefooted in that picture? Dressed
No.
That nice? It looks like he was barefoot.
No, he isn't.
It's just, he's got boots on.
It's
but
just
no
boots.
boots.
Yeah.
You know, they do this really weird, great question. They do this really weird thing that boots did not have the pieces like we do today. It was all one piece, more like a stovepipe that went up. So it makes them look like that more. These are, like I said, borrowed things. The chaps might have been as well. Realize, like I said, I can't go into detail on that. I want to pull these out while we're on that. Thank you for bringing up right here in this case, and because of that, as we step through the gate and we come back into a little more current time frame, and remember the gate clangs, okay, a bit and squeaks as you come back. Those are actually Isam Dart's cuffs. The cowboy cuffs are in that case. It was a chase that lasted 10 or 15 years. I knew the Bassett family had them. The lady was in the museum and she actually sent me photos of them. They were her pride and joy. She was so afraid that somebody in the family would steal them that she had them hanging up with a cord up over a staircase so nobody could get to them. It's like, okay, what happened then after that, and they'd come. It was just great, without going into a huge amount. The story of the photo ties into the cuffs. But anyway, Crawford McKnight, which is Josie Bassett McKnight's son, he had those cuffs in Jensen, Utah, and then they passed down through his family. And so Jane, his daughter, had them. And her kids, to be honest, the museum does not always have money to do things. I think museums that are fortunate enough to have donations and fortunate enough to have other ways, but also occasionally to have funds to purchase something that's irreplaceable. And that's what we did with those, because the family was more interested in the money than they were the cuffs. And so we went with Carrie Stiff, and we found the story of Crawford McKnight talking about the original photo. And in there he said, I have the cuffs that were on Isam Dart the day he was killed. And so Ed Bassett and George was there as well. They took those off of him before they buried him. And so, like I said, they're one of my amazingly cool things. We checked back and forth a lot of ways, by the way. It's got the ID brand in some weird thing, which is Isam's brand, in some weird configurations, but we checked to make sure there was nothing on them that was made after 1900. On and on. We checked all sorts of back and forth ways to make sure that the provenance was as perfect as we could make it. So along comes time, and along comes a guy that's not my favorite guy either. I probably would have been willing to meet this guy, but I was just talking to, and that's the fun part of being at the museum as long as I've gotten to be there, is you get to meet amazing. I know Ora Haley's descendants. They're donors for the museum. I've met descendants of the Lant family that did things, and the Hoy family. This book is called Outskirt Episodes, and it's next, by the way. We might come back to, again, it's my favorite picture of, we have an AI. There should be one other part about it, Katie, coming up. It's after this part.
Hold on, I was thinking.
Okay.
There we go.
So it's Outskirt, and this is William G. Titsworth, okay? Billy Buck is the name he takes for himself in here. And he is very well attached to Browns Park. He marries into a family by the name of Law, and all the Law girls, Mrs. Krause was a Law, Mrs. Allen was a Law, Mrs. Titsworth was a Law. You know, there was only one boy. And anyway, he was heavily involved. Because of he comes in while they're building the Union Pacific. And he's there early. And this son that we're going to talk about a little bit here, he's actually born at Salt Wells in 1879. He has to leave Browns Park because of his behavior, okay? We're going to leave that alone right now. You guys use your imagination. So he moves to Avoca, Iowa, and raises his kids back there. But anyway, he comes up with this book in 1927. His wife, Jean Titsworth, does the copyright out of Avoca, Iowa. And what this appears to me, the biggest problem, again, this is probably responsible, this book alone is responsible for destroying Isam Dart's reputation. Not that it could stand for itself. So what he does in it is it's a nonfiction book. It's a fiction book about, I'll get it right, sorry, it's historical fiction. The problem they did it because he changes people's names. And sometimes Charlie Sparks is Charlie Sparks, he's a real guy. Nat Rasper is actually Matt Reich. And he changed Isam Dart's name to Ned Huddleston. Ned Huddleston is the guy that's in The Player. And he does that with all sorts. There's Pony, anyway, the guy that's the good guy in this book is Billy Buck. Okay? The guy that wrote it. Sure. This guy.
Naturally.
And you'd noticed he lost his eye in that picture. So I don't know, but somebody probably threw something at him. But again, I tried to be nice. He might have just been trying to do a historical fiction work. But this book is so old that it was actually given by one of the principal players in Browns Park. The Spicer family are related to Sparks. And it was given by Charles and Eva Sparks to Mr. Spicer. So this goes back, Charlie Sparks would die in 1930. So so I'm going to say this book is historical fiction. And then I would say, do you guys know what a minstrel show is? Yeah. Okay. So the concept, at least in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, minstrel shows were often done by whites in this particular case, and then they had actors in blackface. And they had to have a buffoon, which was always the black person in most of those minstrel shows. And what it appears that he did, without going into huge amounts of detail on this, he made Ned Huddleston the buffoon, to make him the guy. And he weaves through this whole book, needing to have somebody take care of him. He uses, I don't know what he spoke like. There's no real record of what he actually talked like. He probably had a Texas accent. He could probably say Seguin better than I can, I hope. But he probably had an accent with that. But anyway, he makes him. And so the part that they don't ever cover about this book is the fact that Mincy and Tickiup, they end up having a serious smallpox. And one of them dies, okay? And this is Matt Reich's girlfriend. Excuse me. Isam Dart was doing all he could to get this lady to like him. And she dies of that. But then she comes back to life. Surprise! And so people didn't use that part as being accurate. I don't know why. You guys tell me. Why do you think that was option? But anyway, so they didn't carry that part. So, and it's too bad. But then comes a writer by the name of Will Henry. This is in the 60s. This book was self-published, not well-traveled, except for, unfortunately, local historians that took it and used it as a valuable. One More River to Cross, and it's about Will Henry. And even in the 60s, there was vast amounts of things that needed to be done. But this is what Will Henry changed Isam Dart into. By the way, Outskirts episodes, I gotta quit. Outskirts episodes, he changes his name, Ned Huddleston, to Isam Dart because he's trying to go straight. The Tip Galt gang that he was part of was all wiped out by the people after them. The problem is, historically, there's no mention of Tip Galt at all. The gang, nothing. There's no mention of Ned Huddleston, nothing. Nothing. And if I did my job, you'll see that Dart ties back to Texas. Time and time again, everybody said he was from Texas. And this is what this guy said. And he was a fairly major writer at the time and did Hollywood screen scripts and everything. So this is Will Henry. It's his pen name. Isam Dart was not his real name, nor can any account of those shadowed times declare in truth that his real story of the Arkansas slave who became a legend. He was born without a name. He took that of his white master, Huddleston. He called himself Ned, a simple name for a simple man, yet he raised it to stand beside the tallest. He was not been remembered. It was because he was a black man. The white men have written the records, kept honor of the roll, yet there is justice in time, a truth in folklore. From years long dead and dim trail is pointing by a trapper's lie, a cowboy's yarn, the tribal spinnings of the Yampatikas and Shoshone old ones who knew the once far lonesome basin of the Green, the Little Snake River and the Yampa. The track line fades to follow in the spirit, to mark in the memory, to restore its rightful place among the classics, true tales of the American heritage. These are the dedications of this work, the inspirations for the redemption of the legend of Isam Dart. I think he did a lot of more problems, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
He's right up here with this guy
Yeah.
in my particular making. And again, I would show that I'm going to say these, and this will be offensive, okay? This is a couple of the titles in this book. The Tender-Footed Nigger. The Grizzly Bear Surprises Ned. The Stampede. Billy Buck is great. The Galt Gang meets its reward. And then the Black Thief in Trouble. The Death of Nate Rasper. Summit Springs, and it talks about Tom Horn. He used Isam Dart just strictly a caricature, that he made him into a buffoon to use for this particular non-fiction work that he passed off as fiction. And I'll sort of close with the fact that then comes along, because of that book, some amazing historians who I'd like to have met. I didn't even get to talk to him. I could have, but I didn't. Even John Rolfe Burroughs borrows that story about Ned Huddleston. And they take it that it's accurate. It's not. So, and moving really to the front of the thing is, we try to, like Wikipedia, it's the most well-researched not. in the country. But we can go in and change Isam Dart's story back to being Isam Dart and somebody corrects us right away because they know better. They know that it was Ned Huddleston. You got it all wrong. And so if I've done anything today, I hope it's the fact that there is document after document after document that Isam Dart was a black cowboy that lived in Browns Park and where he came from, what he did, and the unbelievable spirit he had to have had to live in a white man's world and to really to rise in that particular time and place. To be what he became. And so I don't like what the last 100 years have done to this guy's reputation. I'll be honest, it offends me. And I'm not related to him, but I'm certainly vested as far as the historical part. So there's a little part, if Katie can get it to work. And if it doesn't, I'm going to read it and we'll be up for questions. If this works, it's actually Daniel Titsworth, the son of the guy that wrote Outskirts Episodes, who was a first-hand new Dart, knew about it. If you guys have a good chance, it'll go into this or I'll read it. And I'll try to get out of the way.
Well, we got there, like, here we, Isam Dart had it laid in a wagon box outside the cabin.
Can you guys hear that?
And he was, I think he had on a jacket. And, he had one or two shirts. And a heavy suit of underwear. And he was shot just an inch to the right, an inch below the heart. No, not the heart. It's just an inch to the right of the breastbone, right? And an inch below that, just to the right of the breastbone. And there was Martin Caponi, Larry Kirk, Billy Bragg, who was running cattle, the Goslin's cattle, Charlie Goslin. And F. Bassett, George Bassett, a little fellow by the name of Whitey. Well, and J.S. Hoy. J.S. Hoy is just the beach. And in that case, Whitey'd act as coroner, being so far away. So they started the inquest and they wanted one more man. Martin tried to get me to sit in on the jury and I wouldn't do it because I just lacked 3 weeks of being of age, see. Martin said, oh, that don't make any difference. So I said, no, I wouldn't do it. But I remember Billy Bragg came out there and he was examining this shot. And he took a little stick, a little twig, straight twig, about the size of a small lead pencil. He ran down in that bullet hole there to see what that bullet went. Of course, he couldn't tell anything about it. But I helped dig the grave. Ed Bassett, George, somebody else. We was digging out there, and we run into a lot of rocks. Rocks stand on edge like that. We had quite a time getting it down. Well, I know the story was that Isam Dart and George Bassett left the cabin that morning along about 8 o'clock and started out to the corral. They always kept a couple of horses in the corral overnight, and then they'd go out and catch fresh horses, drive fresh horses in. And they were walking side by side out towards the corral. When him and Whitey was sitting out front of the house there watching them, they said they heard that shot. And they both stopped. And then they said the old Isam just pitched right forward on his face.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh.
So if you didn't, we can go back over it. But it always says a lot to me that the person that had enough insight. I have a guess on who did that oral history, but I'm not sure positively. It came through the Stoddard family, which is the newspaper people in Craig. I think that was probably Chuck Sr. But to have the purpose to ask that question, so you get an eyewitness. And that's the kind of stuff that we tried to do on everything when I had you going on that back trail. So in the interest of, I'm really late, but anyway, we're on time for any questions, but thank you for your attention. I hope that you can become something that, and again, if you have any interest in the area, to pick up a book, or I'm sure the library has it as well, to sort of join group with me to actually sort of set the things straight with Isam Dart. That if you hear somebody say Ned Huddleston, say that's garbage. You know, I mean, there's no proof of it. There's no whatever, and he was a pretty amazing man, and an outstanding person to have been able to do what he did. Tom Horn was who Tom Horn is, and I think a very unsavory character.
Is that who shot him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that never, thank you, that never went to trial. Because he ends up killing a guy up in Wyoming a couple of years later. But that year after that, because of it, he would brag that he got rid of wrestling in Browns Park in one summer. And there was another guy that was hiding names because he worked for the Pinkertons for a long time, so he had to change names. And he's laughing about it because he calls him Tom Corn. And he jumps in to escape something. He gets into the cattle haul on the UP, cattle. I just lost the word for it. But anyway, would be pulled by the railroad, and he gets down in there, say, "Isn't that funny? A corn among horns? No, without the right name, it doesn't. Corn among horns." But anyway, he was bragging about doing that to people outside the park. So I'll take his own words to let him. So I always say if he didn't kill Willie Nickel, he had it coming for the two guys he killed in Browns Park, personally. So he was hung in about 1903 in Cheyenne. He's buried in Boulder. Yeah.
Did was branding really prevalent then? Is that how they busted these guys for wrestling?
Yeah, and then you'd look at the hide, you'd do that. So what happened?
Brand over the brand.
Yeah, you do that, but then also there's every year the calf's born, and what I was surprised, I did some background research, I don't know anything about cattle ranching, that the money was a fairly quick turnaround when you think about it, because by the time the cow was birthed, then you could ship it in about 18 months. So you're talking a year and a half or something like that. So if those cows were out in the range, there were lots of calves that weren't branded until they had that. So you could easily go put your brand on, and then it was your calf. It's sort of weird. It didn't match up with the brand on the cow, the mother cow. That was a bit of a problem. And so it's always about, if they were butchered, they'd be looking, and that to be honest, Ann Bassett is then the first person that's arrested for cattle rustling in Moffat County when it became a county in 11. And it ties all back to this Tom Horn stuff with Haley. It all ties back into that feud that was going on with those families. And I would say that, yeah, they probably did it, but the real problem with it is Ora Haley wanted to have that range. And before it was over, by 1909, he buys out the Hoy brothers in Browns Park, and therefore he owned it. So this is only in that short little period of time that he ended up owning it, and then the war was over as far as that range, because he would own a large. I'm taking the homesteader local lead. Yeah, that's just me. I'm not taking Ora Haley's. I try to be nice to the family, by the way, because they really are nice people. Really nice people. So, any questions?
So was he basically a ranch hand or more of a rustler?
He was, I'm going to say, a bronco buster. And so he actually, your questions are great. He actually had enough property. His estate was probated, Isam Dart was probated in both Wyoming and Colorado.
Oh.
So he was becoming a rancher, a cattle rancher is what he was becoming at the time. So yeah, he was far more than just a cowboy. And a wrestler, okay, maybe, and most likely. But I think the reason for Horn coming in was about control of the range more than it was execution of the cattle wrestler. Because that was a very small group. There'd be people that would seriously disagree with me. But it was about having that range where he could make huge amounts of money with his cattle versus losing a few. I think it was the money profit line that was driving him. There's a story when the Grounds family bought out the Haley place in 1917. Mr. Grounds comes up and meets Orr Haley in Denver, and he said, "These are the 5 best cattle rustlers I've ever seen." And anyway, and basically, Mr. Grounds could only remember the name of Isam Dart and Matt Rash, and that's a dead cattle rustler. And he had the 5 vouchers that paid for their deaths on his desk, bragging about them being the best rustlers he had ever had. That sort of speaks for itself too. Anything else?
Did Isam ever have any extended family? You said that his estate was probated, but...
No, as in with all families I've ever seen that had no direct families, I don't know if he kept in any contact with the family in Texas at all. I'd love to, if I had lots of time, I would find them and ask. But usually by the time you find great grandkids and that, you usually know more about the family than they do. But it almost, and there's a whole estate file, both in Routt County and in Sweetwater. The neighbors all end up with it. The executor. The executor has money doing it, and then the neighbor said, well, I sold him a cow that he hadn't paid for. Or he owed me money for the back. And maybe those are all true.
Yeah.
But it ends up not being anything left. It just disappears. It takes wings and leaves. Anything else? Again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Do you know of any entity that gives tours of the park?
Well, sometimes we do. It would be fun. It would be fun to do.
I would love to.
We need to do it. I've learned a lot about tours nowadays. Things you don't do. We took a tour of Browns Park one time, years back, and 2 of the people that owned the places were my bosses as county commissioners. And so I was up there talking about them. Thanks again, guys. I was up in front of the commissioners that day, and P. Wright said, you know, it might be good if you got permission from the landowners before you went. Well, there was another guy that was in charge of that park, and he didn't get permission. So it's like, thank you very much. Now I've never